people saying, I've lost everything. And the only thing, you could say, everything is going to be all right.
It was rough.
Keep praying.
Definitely, it was rough. But this is the first time I've ever come or get so
The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
The first day of September would normally pass with little fanfare. No holidays or celebrations to speak of. But that all changed in 2019. September 1st will forever be known in the Bahamas as one of the worst days in our history. Hello and welcome. I'm Jerome Sawyer.
And I'm Jessica Robertson. It was the day that Category 5 Hurricane Dorian began the worst reign of terror in the history of natural disasters in our country. When it was over, it would leave behind a staggering death toll, a trail of damage in the billions, countless lives and livelihoods destroyed, and a country reeling from the trauma of a powerful and deadly storm.
Over the next hour, we will present Dorian's devastation 1 year later, a focus on Abaco. I'll look back at the tragic events of a year ago and the ongoing struggle to recover from those who lived through and after it.
The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
Welcome back. You're watching Dorian's devastation 1 year later. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, along with Jessica Robertson. On Saturday, August 24th, 2019, forecasters advised that a tropical wave had developed to become the fifth tropical storm of the season. It was more than 700 miles away from the Lesser Antilles and not forecast to be much of a weather maker. Bahamians enjoying bright, sunny summer weather paid it little mind. Little did anyone know what was in store just over a week later.
By day's end, August 28, 2019, Dorian had officially become a Category 1 hurricane, and conditions were such that forecasters were warning that the central and northwestern Bahamas should begin to prepare for the ever-increasing possibility of dangerous storm surge and hurricane-force winds later in the week. By Thursday, August 29th, still Category 1 Dorian was expected to bring up to 7 inches of rain to isolated portions of the northwestern islands. Bahamians were on alert and storm prep had begun in earnest, but there was still no way of knowing what was to come. By Saturday, August 31st, hurricane warnings had been posted as now dangerous Category 4 Hurricane Dorian took aim at the northwestern Bahamas. Throughout the day, the hurricane intensified and slowed down its forward speed. Packing 150-mile-an-hour winds, it was moving at just 8 miles an hour. Further strengthening was expected, and the storm surge warning was now for as much as 15 to 20 feet above normal tides. Anticipated rainfall now as much as 25 inches. Sunday, September 1st, 2019, a day that would never be forgotten in the Bahamas. By 8 a.m., catastrophic Hurricane Dorian was now officially a Category 5 storm. Winds were 160 miles an hour with 220-mile-an-hour gusts. The center was just 35 miles east of Abaco, moving at 8 miles an hour. Hours later, the winds were up to 180 miles an hour, the strongest hurricane in modern history to hit the northwestern Bahamas. By 2 p.m., the eye was passing slowly over the Abacos. Sustained winds were up to 185 miles an hour. Wind gusts were over 225 miles an hour. By 5 p.m., Dorian had slowed even further to 5 miles an hour as it now took aim at Grand Bahama with all the fury it had unleashed on the Abaco Islands. Nothing could have prepared us for what we saw in those hours that Dorian annihilated Abaco. Bahamians and the rest of the world looked on in horror.
Bahamas, of course, still reeling from Dorian. The official death toll climbing to 30 this morning, and now the health minister there says the final count will be, quote, staggering, and that is because thousands of people could still be missing there.
Overnight, the death toll rising 5 days after Hurricane Dorian left its mark on the Bahamas. Officials say at least 30 people have now been pronounced dead, with the fear the final death toll will be staggering.
Everybody's like in a state of shock right now. We lost everything. So right now, we just like in survival mode right now.
Everything in Abaco is totally destroyed. It literally looked like we were bombed.
It was pretty scary, but during that you don't have time to be scared. You know, you in survival mode, so you're just trying to do what you could do, save what we could save, and get up higher.
The global media descended immediately. Every major network and newspaper was headlining the devastation of Dorian in the Bahamas. But for Bahamian media professionals like Jared Higgs of Our News, it was so much more personal.
I thought going to Abaco 5 days after the storm that I was late. You understand? You know, you feel like 5 days is late to get there, but as a matter of fact, 5 days was, my many other colleagues in journalism would say, no, that was early, because of, just the dire situation on the ground at the time. It was a humanitarian crisis, nothing short of it. That was obviously in its very early, very raw stages. Of course, we remember the difficulties getting into Abaco. You had to fly in through the south into Sandy Point, about a 2-hour drive north to Marsh Harbor, flooded roads, people still in a state of panic, or if not panic, just trying to get out. Of course, it was panic though when you got to Marsh Harbor and you saw the situation at the government complex, which was housing many displaced people at that time. There was, of course, a lot of people lost their lives, and that was evident when we got there.
This obviously was your first time covering something like this. What was it like emotionally for you?
Covering Hurricane Dorian was very emotional, even before we got to Abaco, because before we got there, we had confirmation of deaths. So when I was still in Nassau, maybe it was Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, I think it might have been Tuesday, when Dr. Minnis would have come on and confirmed that there were deaths. And so that was very difficult, because I think that, speaking for me, I did not want it to be true, because that means that we have a much bigger crisis on our hands. It means, and then it even means, that there must have been some failures as a country. We didn't protect, the people in our country, and so it was difficult getting the news the first time. It was difficult going into Marsh Harbor and seeing, that the situation was so chaotic that they had not, collected bodies yet. I mean, I had people showing me where these bodies were, and so that itself it only lends to, the argument that, the situation in Marsh Harbor at that time was totally unprecedented, massive humanitarian crisis. Again, I imagine I could only imagine, I'm telling the story and people maybe not being able to understand it, because it really was that bad. The response, of course, to Hurricane Dorian, even though it did not impact New Providence and maybe other islands, obviously we were all just so heartbroken by it. Speaking for myself, a lot of Bahamians obviously stepped up after Dorian really tested our resolve as a nation. And again, I believe that, there are more tests to come.
We Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in. We Bahamians, We're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
You're watching Dorian's Devastation 1 year later. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, along with Jessica Robertson. It was clear within hours that this was a disaster larger than any of us could have ever imagined. But priority one was helping the injured, homeless and traumatized residents of Abaco.
So the Coast Guard presence here in the Bahamas is very unique, really unique to the world. We're the only Bahamas is the only country where we have 3 Coast Guard helicopters deployed here 365 days out of the year. So they know the waters, they know the partners. They have a 10-person team out of the U.S. Embassy in Nassau, and so it's very familiar to us. So really what, prior to the storm arriving, we started to shift focus from our legacy counter-drug operation known as OPAT, kind of shifted focus and put on our search and rescue hats, and started to get ready to prepare for a response to the devastation that was about to ensue. So we launched a couple different helicopters that same day, and the one that got in close, they were experiencing hurricane force winds. You can imagine with a Category 4, just outside those bands are still, Category 1, 2 force winds that a helicopter's trying to fly through. It's just a wall of white because it's rain. They're getting thrown around, they're getting beat up. The crew is probably getting airsick, but they eventually got eyes on Marsh Harbor. That was really the first. You could see the Keys, we could see Marsh Harbor. And we were able to get them on and down and land that first sortie and assess, what was going on, get pictures, and then provide an initial medevac from that Marsh Harbor clinic on that first aircraft sortie. So there was really a whole of government approach from the U.S. Obviously, USAID was one of the first on scene. They launched a DART team, and they were, at the end of the day, all the search and rescue efforts were coordinated by the Royal Bahama Defense Force and then eventually NEMA. So we were basically supporting those 2 agencies and the government of Bahamas as a whole. So we had one specific request, and I believe it was probably day 5 or day 6. There was a 90-year-old female, and I believe she was blind and she had severe medical issues. We dispatched a helicopter to go and pick that lady up. Well, the helicopter basically, en route to pick that person up, they stopped just short and picked up somebody and a group of people that looked like they were in dire need. So we had thought that lady was rescued. Well, that afternoon we got another request, the same request, and we all had to go back and reassess and figure out, that first helicopter wasn't able to pick her up. So that afternoon we were able to send out another helicopter, land on a baseball field in Marsh Harbor, pick up this lady and her 3 family members, and took her back, and she lives today because of us. So our air crews were challenged with that on a daily basis. So we would send them to X location to pick up 4 patients that were critically injured and needed to be at a higher level of medical care. But en route, you had thousands of people on the beach waving to them, looking for them to stop and land. And it's very difficult for them, I'm sure, to pass over a whole bunch of people that are, that could be in need. But, they had to remember their tasking, that, hopefully that our office was doing our job and prioritizing those with the critical medical need. And that was our focus those first couple of days, really those first 2 weeks, is to, we can't evacuate 50,000 people from Grand Bahama and Abaco on 6 Coast Guard helicopters, but we can evacuate 400 critical need patients and save their lives.
You were looking at persons that had injuries from minor abrasions to fractures, persons coming in that required, that as a result of having should I say, end-stage renal disease and are on dialysis. Were coming in because they require dialysis, and that would be urgent because of the destruction. We also had persons with multiple injuries, head injuries, persons with dehydration, those types of cases.
If I hadn't been there and seen it for myself, nobody could have described to me the hopelessness, the helplessness that you feel. Even as a physician, I felt like, yes, I can give them medication to help with their diabetes, and I can help with their hypertension, and I could even give them a supply so that they don't have to go to the clinic, so they don't have that to worry about right now. But I can't give them back what they lost. And I mean, that feeling for me was so impactful on a personal level. It was very emotional, and It's very hard to look someone in the eye and not feel survivor's guilt, not feel guilty that I have my family to go back to, not feel guilty that I have a house to go back to, and I have a job and I have something to keep me going. It was really difficult to look them in their eyes and know that they had lost everything and I still had everything. And it's hard.
On the first night, we were dealing with probably people with a lot of medical issues, like people who had to get to Nassau to do dialysis. So they came in that night. They were the first that they brought in, and those with severe injury. Because I remember one case where a gentleman came in that night, and we realized that his arm was amputated. So he was very critical, so we had to rush him to the hospital. And all the flights that came in that night were basically medical emergency, people that needed to go on dialysis.
Sometimes there were times you would have multiple flights on the ground at one time. And so dealing with the critical, urgent cases, these were the things, and keeping that level of control, trying to keep everything under control and to be able to sort the patients and liaise, because that's part of the job also, was liaising with the necessary institutions. So in the liaison, you found that it was overwhelming.
Medical training teaches us to be good at helping people on an emotional and a physical level as well, and on a mental level. It does help us to kind of acknowledge that those things play a part in disease, but I don't think it could have prepared us for the magnitude of the disaster that Hurricane Dorian left. I just don't think anything could have prepared us for the monster that came.
The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
Almost before we as a country had begun to truly grasp the level of the devastation unleashed on Abaco, the world came rushing in to help. Local and international NGOs quickly began to assess and provide for the most immediate needs of food, water and shelter. A year later, many of them are still here. The focus shifted to more helping Bahamians rebuild their shattered lives.
You have to deal with the trauma that everybody went through. And so it wasn't just a matter of picking people up and bringing them to Nassau, but having to appreciate the unbelievable trauma that they've experienced and how they're trying to individually deal with it.
The Bahamas Red Cross, since then, we would have come to the immediate needs of those in Abaco by providing those basic essentials, shelter, food, and then what a lot of us don't realize, and we're still dealing with this, is the psychological impact that individuals would have been affected by. We see this now in Abaco, where in the passage of the recent hurricane, and then the threats of hurricanes here in the Bahamas during the 2020 hurricane season, people are really traumatized by the threat of any pending storm.
No, I think one thing, at least for Samaritan's Purse, that's unique is the number of habitated islands and keys, right? And so with boats being damaged and limited access to get out to those smaller out islands and keys, and those people had, inability to communicate. A lot of the cell service was down because of the towers being damaged. So getting out with various aviation assets from our organization in partnership with U.S. military and Coast Guard that provided assistance early on, we were able to reach those people that were kind of remote and cut off from access.
I think for all of us who were involved in whatever way in the response to Dorian, there are moments that stand out that every once in a while kind of keep you up at night. What's your moment?
My moment is the loss of life. The loss of life. Because to me, you can buy a person a bed. You can help them repair their home. But you cannot replace their family members. And to me, the fact that you, even to today, you do not know all of the persons that you would have lost, that is, you know, that is very disheartening. It is a reality that you'll have to deal with, but I think it will stay with me for quite some time.
What we were able to do to some 3,000 households was provide them with multi-purpose cash, which is a debit card, giving them dignity and respect to say, hey, you probably know, not probably, you know your needs better than we do at Red Cross. So here is $3,700 approximately, just shy of $3,700 that we would provide it to more than 3,000 households. And this was a means for them to determine, you know, what is my next best step? I'm gonna need shelter. So it's really for the responsible individuals to determine how they would use those monies in their own lives.
In Abaco, we've done a number of things. We started off, we worked with H2O, the water company here, to partner to get a portable water distribution system in Treasure Key. By the time we got to getting it done, because by the time you order it and you have it made and all that, then COVID-19 was upon us. So we actually created a situation where we could get it there and help the individuals in Treasure Key so they wouldn't have to drive to Marsh Harbor, because what happens is everybody piles into a truck, and then we were concerned about spreading COVID-19.
Dorian sure changed the game, and it will be remembered by this generation who no doubt will let the younger generation know what we would have gone through. And when we see them relaxing, you know, in their preparations, we can remind them that, hey, you never know which one it's going to be, because we never thought it would be Dorian. And Dorian has now placed an image before us for any pending storms or hurricanes coming our way. That's the first thing we're going to think of. What if? What if this is another Dorian?
The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
Marsh Harbor and the communities and keys of North Abaco were ground zero for Dorian. With so much loss and devastation, it's hard to imagine having to sit at the helm to lead the rescue and recovery. A former Defence Force Marine turned Member of Parliament now assumed that role as the MP for North Abaco.
Being on the ground and being able to help in any way that I could was important for me. The sheer magnitude of the devastation and destruction left you kind of speechless. And then instincts kick in, and you move to how do we help save lives now? Because you have to move into the recovery phase. You have to find those that were trapped, that we got calls from while the event was ongoing, and we just simply had to say to them, look, listen, we can't send out any first responders now to put them in harm's way. Just secure yourselves as best as you can in the moment until we can get to you. And so your survival instincts kick in, and you try to send help or direct help as readily as you could to those that were in immediate need. You felt the destruction, I mean, that took place, and to see lives completely disheveled over a matter of about 30 hours or so. People's whole entire life's work just obliterated. It is very difficult to describe the feeling. One good moment I really had, Jerome, that I'd like to share with you was hearing the United States Coast Guard chopper coming in to assist us with removing those that were critically injured, who needed to be immediately medevaced from Abaco. It was a moment when I realized personally that we were not alone, because after a while you lose communications and you're cut off. You can't get information back to the capital as readily as you would like. The communications was intermittent at best.
Minister, was there ever a time that you felt helpless? Was there a time you felt that I don't have what I need to help my people? Did you have those moments at all?
Yes. The entire experience caused you to feel impotent because you were faced with the forces of Mother Nature. Winds were gusting in excess of 250 miles per hour, and this went on for hours. And so throughout the entire event, you felt this need to do more, but you simply couldn't. At one point, we had reports of casualties. You could not go to confirm them. You had reports of people being trapped in buildings with rising water. You couldn't go out to assist them. And so there were moments there where you felt like, what can I do?
People have told me, in my own reporting and in personal sort of conversations, that there were times that they lost control, that there was no authority on the ground. They didn't know who was in charge. It was a free-for-all. People were looting. They feared for their lives. Was there a period of time where you lost control on the island?
My answer to that would be no. We, the police and I, and the administrator, Senior Administrator Duncombe, Chief Superintendent Mortimer and his staff, the Defense Force officers that were there, we understood that after events like this, life-threatening events, there's sort of a natural inclination by people to secure themselves. And so we allowed people, allowed may not be the right word, but we observed people trying to get food and water and whatever else they thought that they needed to have to secure themselves in the moment. It was never in my mind a place of a complete loss of control. But we understood what was going on. We understood that through natural inclinations, this idea of self-preservation kicked in, and people were just trying to do what they could, not knowing what the future held.
What do you think could have been done or should have been done differently, if anything at all could have been done?
I think we lost communications quite early in the storm. We're used to communicating to people through mediums such as this, through television, through radio. Abaco was in a completely devastated state. No water, no light. In many cases, people didn't even have a roof over their head, and so they wanted to get out. They wanted some relief. And Jerome, a lot of people don't quite appreciate the trauma that one who experiences such event will go through. And so in many cases, you're just thinking of survival. You're not thinking of the long term into the future. And so you just want immediate relief. And so we understood that people wanted to be evacuated, and eventually we were able to get Bahamas Air, and boats came from Eleuthera and other islands in the country to evacuate people to a place of safety. We have come a tremendously long way, I believe. I think power has been restored up to, from what I'm understanding, I'm advised between 80 and 85%. Water is likely in the same category. But Jerome, I say that and I say this. We have done very well, but we still have quite a long way to go. We will not get there until everyone who's lost have recovered what they've lost in Dorian and have returned their lives to that state of normality that they have become accustomed to. And until then, I wouldn't say that we are whole.
The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
Let Marlin Marine and Generac power your home through storms, heat waves, and power outages with our selection of generators. Generac standbys are easy to install, provide reliable power, and maintain comfort levels for the entire home. Get a standby that fits your needs by scheduling an on-site inspection, or use our size calculator on Facebook and get a free estimate. When the power cuts out, Generac steps in. Get yours today at Marlin Marine. giving you power on land and sea.
Marlin Marine, giving you power on land and sea.
We at Doctors Hospital have been hard at work preparing for the new normal. From COVID screening as you enter the facility, to mandatory hand and shoe washing stations. To further limit contact, we have launched a concierge service that allows for pre-registration and in-car waiting. Scheduling for imaging, laboratory, rehabilitation, and other services has also been adjusted. And our pharmacy is now offering curbside pickup and delivery. We're here to serve you with the same quality and care that you've come to expect. Doctors Hospital. Trusted and best care now. Isn't your health worth it?
Doctors Hospital. Trusted and best care now. Isn't your health worth it?
You Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
You're watching Dorian's devastation 1 year later, a focus on Abaco. I'm your host, Jessica Robertson, along with Jerome Sawyer. Never before had we experienced so many mass casualties in a single event. The stories of those who survived and watched loved ones slip away were heart-wrenching. We watched and we listened to one horrific experience after the other.
The car can't even reach it.
The windows are broken, and now water is coming through those big windows you see over there. Wait, the car moving?
The front yard view of the house that I'm in.
I still can remember him reaching for me, calling me, "Daddy!" And the breeze slide him across the roof and drop him on the search on the next side of the building. The opposite side from where I put him up. By the time I moved the breeze and get round there, the way he fell, I gone down twice, looking for him, feeling for him, because I couldn't see. What I saw when I lose him, anything could happen. He had sharks swimming in the water. Anything could happen. Everything in my power, whilst he was with me, to try to save myself.
Mother, sir. Oh yeah. Yes. Oh, Andrew.
You said I'm coming up over that building. No wonder that building couldn't survive. Oh my God, it didn't even reach yet.
Dorian was a life-altering event for so many in central and northern Abaco and the surrounding keys. Having survived 180-mile-per-hour winds, tidal surge and incessant rain, they emerged from their demolished homes to find death and devastation all around. Marsh Harbor residents Dexter Russell and Tequila Thompson shared with us what it was like to realize that this storm was shaping up to be so much worse than they could have ever imagined, and whether this is something they think they will ever get over.
Well, immediately when things started to really go south, you know, at first it's like this sheer panic, like, is this really happening? Are we really losing a roof? You know, is this really, you know, whiteout conditions? You can't really see more than 6 feet outside of, you know, the window at that point, which had lost a shutter. So there was that instant panic, but then it was like, well, hold on, you got to kind of get it together. And, you know, and I did, and we did, and we were quite okay. And then it was quickly, I don't know how long the eye is going to last, so let's look for a safe place to go. I think, unfortunately, what happened for a lot of people is that there really weren't too many places to go. You know, I kind of walked outside thinking, you know, we'll go to the neighbors. But when I walked outside, the neighbor's roof was also gone. So, and every roof that I could see was gone, excluding our neighbor directly across the street. So what I did was got one of the vehicles, which was still operable. One at lamp pole had fallen across, so it was obviously dead. And we got, me and my grandfather got my grandmother and my mother in the vehicle and ferried them kind of across the street over the debris, small debris at that point in the yard, immediate yard. So luckily we were able to get to a house, and I would imagine there was probably 15, 16 people from the eye onwards, because so many neighbors came to the only place they could.
When it was clear, after the eye had passed, after the second half had passed, and you were able to all come outside, thank God that you lived through it, and see what had happened, what went through your mind as you saw the devastation that this storm had left behind?
It was truly unimaginable. It was. What you'll hear from so many Abaconians is that it wasn't like, the front street had been destroyed because of a storm surge. There was literally pretty much nothing left. My entire neighborhood, which I'd grown up in that neighborhood where the house was, it was completely obliterated. There was, like end of the world type scenes, mounds of debris 15, 18 feet high.
I was in the Marsh Harbor area, and the area that we were in is a low-lying area, and we expected that it would have flooded. But I would say around 10 o'clock that morning, the water was above the roof, so we had to swim out of the house in order to evacuate. We swam out of the house, and there's a big tree in the yard, in the front of the yard, so we had to hold on to the tree until the eye of the storm came. So we were outside in the midst of the storm.
And once the eye came, then what? What did you do?
Well, we had to wait for the water to reduce a bit. It got to like maybe my neck, and we were able to walk out. And once we left from the house, Great Abaco Beach Resort is near the house. It's near where I was staying. So we were able to walk over there to seek shelter. But like maybe half an hour into the back end of the storm, the entire side of the wall that was facing the sea was ripped off. So the water, all the seawater, the rain water, everything started gushing in upstairs, and the people started running back downstairs. During the hurricane, that whole entire night, the metal shutters that were on the wall, on the doors, they were peeled off during the hurricane. So the only thing stopping us from the seawater was the thin piece of glass, the sliding door glass. And all night, the seawater and the rain beat on the glass.
Did you think you were going to die at any point?
Of course, especially with seeing the amount of force the water came in the house with. It was a thought that maybe this is the way that I was going to go.
Here we are, almost a year later. Do you ever get over something like this?
No, and I guess even from your standpoint with your viewers, what I guess I would want everybody to know is you really don't. And for a lot of Abaconians and Grand Bahamians, we've kind of been living in this crisis state now since the 1st of September 2019. We went from that horrible impact of Dorian, where we pretty much lost everything, to now, COVID-19. and again, economic hardship, inability to recover because pretty much the entire world's on pause. So it's really, it really has been quite difficult. I don't think you ever get over the images that we saw, the bodies that we saw. I don't think that you can ever fully get over that. I think you live with residual scars in that some way or another forever. I still have nightmares, and I consider myself pretty well adjusted. But and I have a 5-year-old nephew who still doesn't like when it rains. So I don't think you ever do. And I think from a national perspective, I would say, like, everyone needs to recognize, that might be a little harsh, but I think if the national consciousness would recognize that we are truly an emotionally impacted people, and it doesn't go away.
What was it, if you could sort of describe this whole experience? You've gone through the storm, you thought you were going to die, now you have to leave your home. What were you feeling emotionally? What was it like for you having to leave, having gone through that experience?
But it was sad leaving the place that I grew up, the place I know all my life. It was sad leaving it the way that it was. I knowing what we've been through and what we experienced. And it was kind of heartbreaking because I couldn't identify, like, places where I grew up, it looked completely different. It looked completely different, completely destroyed, and that bothered me for a bit.
3 months later, a new ministry was formed to help coordinate this massive reconstruction effort. Out of that ministry came the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, dedicated solely to restoring these broken communities. It would be headed by former Senate President Catherine Smith.
As you know, Bahamians like to see action right away. And so in the throes of this devastating hurricane, we had this new authority that had been given the mandate to basically rebuild the Northern Islands, or be the lead agency in these Northern Islands for the rebuilding.
But what was most pressing to people, it would seem that a lot of the humanitarian stuff may have already been addressed, but if you could just sort of tell us what were the immediate needs in those days?
The immediate needs were, people, first of all, believe it or not, wanted to talk to people. They wanted to get a sense that people cared about what had happened in Abaco. And many people said that they felt that the response in terms of coming to Abaco to check on what those needs were, they felt could have been better. So they really wanted to talk through a lot of things. And while we were there to find out what their rebuilding concerns were, people were still talking about the impact of the hurricane on their families and their lives. So we had town meetings to talk about rebuilding, but people were also talking about the effects of Dorian. So it was a very traumatic time when we had gone to Abaco after the hurricane and started these town meetings. But people were concerned about losing their homes, what would be next. People were very concerned about the amount of debris on those islands and how that was going to be handled. But generally, I think if there were two big things that people had a concern with, it was about rebuilding their homes, how businesses had been impacted, where the government services were. They had concerns about security issues, which still persist today.
The primary focus around all of the efforts will always center around us being able to ensure that the primary functions of any municipality are in place. So we would take a look at the needs for hospital services, police services, transportation services, utility services. Would generally take the lead in all of these functions. They are the lead items that support life. We would want to make sure that all of the persons that are receiving the humanitarian relief that was coming in And that would be in terms of food and shelter, which would be the immediate need. It would be very quickly followed by medical attention that would be immediately needed. And then we would turn to looking towards having to protect folks and having to ensure that we can get them back to some level of stability while we start the assessment and the cleanup process. So rebuilding the society starts at the elements of the society that allow people to function. Thereafter, we then take a look at the human needs, the human sheltering needs, and then the cleanup needs. The tremendous amount of debris was something that I don't think this country's ever seen. So it took a whole entire new approach to the way that the Ministry of Works would have approached the assessment and went about structuring the collection and identified a location to take it all, which would have been in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Health Services. The initial assessment and the ability to react immediately was superb. The Ministry of Works did a fantastic job of being able to marshal resources and to get all of those available that were in Abaco who had the equipment, had the know-how, get them engaged, get them on the ground, identify an area for them and put them to work.
We believe today that probably, I would say 90% of most of the Dorian debris, we've been able to move out of communities and get to the debris management sites in Abaco. That doesn't mean that we will not still have stuff to do. I mean, this is a long recovery. And as residents move back into Abaco, we're gonna have debris.
Abaco had a very vibrant tourism industry and a very vibrant business community. You know, how is the restoring the economy? How important is that, and how much of a priority is that to you?
Well, that's a big priority because, as you know, Abaconians generally is a very progressive group of people. They like their independence and they want to work. I know the Small Business Development Center has done some things for small businesses, both in Abaco and Grand Bahama, spent to date about $3.4 million into the community for small businesses to get themselves back on their feet. Is that enough? Absolutely not. There's so many people still not back home in Abaco, and they have great need. You know, with all of the destruction that took place, when you go down the main commercial area of Marsh Harbor, you see the destruction that has taken place, and it has affected the businesses. But there has to be a real discussion in the coming weeks about town planning and what's next in terms of urban development for Abaco.
So how has that worked when you have all of these keys that have all of these needs and these individuals?
The keys have actually been a major focus for us. And it goes without saying that we've had great assistance from NGOs that have come in this country and have assisted us and have in many instances given us a great amount of information and resources and have taught us some things about storm recovery and storm response. But in the keys in particular, a large focus was played on how we restore the life back to the keys. Many of the keys have been excellent in the way that they went about it. Green Turtle Key, for instance, has really just had a fantastic recovery program, which was homegrown. It was something that they did for the most part, where they marshaled their resources. And they had great assistance from second homeowners who have homes on the Key and absolutely love the Abacos and love the Bahamas, and were more than happy to come in and lend that type of support.
What is being done to accommodate those immigrants, the Haitian immigrants in Abaco, who have been, I think, very adversely affected in all of this and continue to struggle?
I don't know if you may or may not have heard, the Prime Minister's position is, all those persons, and I think this has generally been the government's position, all those persons who live in Abaco, who are legal residents of Abaco, should be able to take advantage of whatever is offered in terms of housing and just living the way that people want to live, and communities should be offered to all those persons who are legally resident in Abaco. So I think, there's no hiding it. There has been an ongoing issue as it relates to immigration issues in Abaco, but it has to be addressed. And, Wendell and I represent the Disaster Reconstruction Authority. We are not the policy makers. However, we do come in contact, and we have to deal with the issues square on, because of the work that we're doing in rebuilding.
The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in. The Bahamians, we're not going to stop until we get everybody in.
On September 1st, we watched the largest storm in recorded history batter Abaco. We remember those who died that day and the many still missing, and we pray for the families they have left behind. But this tragedy was not over yet.
Grand Bahama was now in the path of monster storm Dorian. We were about to be hit with part 2. Be sure to join us for the second part of Dorian's devastation 1 year later from Grand Bahama. Thanks for watching.